ignition locks, 3-2 beer, just the existence of Uber and Lyft. As a Minnesotan, I remember very clearly the pilgrimage that we all used to take on Sundays to go across the bridge to Wisconsin to get our beer because they did not allow Sunday sales in Minnesota. But was there actually a scientific reason for this pilgrimage? Around the world, rates of drunk driving are decreasing. So, what is the reason for this? What policies work and which ones don't? So first, just having a minimum drinking age of 21 seems to work decently well in preventing drunk driving crashes. And this is true of that zero tolerance policy for anybody under 21 too. The zero tolerance policy is saying that if you were under 21, no amount of alcohol can be in your system if you're driving. And this does limit drunk driving crashes if people are aware of it. We also see that decreasing that maximum amount of alcohol in your system from 0.1 to 0.08, that seems to reduce drunk driving too, as well as making these rules per se. So that is basically saying that if you get pulled over and your blood alcohol content is above 0.08, it doesn't matter what other evidence you have. That is enough to say that you are driving drunk. We also see that just taking away someone's license immediately, so basically saying, nope, you are pulled over for drunk driving, your license is gone, that seems to prevent drunk driving in the future. So it seems like suspending it for 3 months or less, that doesn't do anything. That is not enough of a punishment to deter that crime. But if you have a 12 to 18 month suspension, that seems to work decently well. Now, there's an important caveat here. There is a recommendation that people should have the ability to continue driving to places where they need to go. But just restricting someone's license makes it very difficult for people to do kind of the day-to-day things they need to, including work to pay the fines for getting that suspension. We also see that doing things specifically for teens kind of works. So that graduated licensing where they get their permit first and then they have the official license, and then you go super far backwards if you end up having any sort of ticket during that time, that seems to help teenagers actually be able to progress properly and stop with some of the risky behavior like driving drunk. Another thing that works, just getting rid of all the drive-through liquor stores, which y'all, who thought this was a good idea in the first place? So there are stores out there, if you are not in a state that has them, where you can just drive through and basically pick up your alcohol via drive-through window. Unsurprisingly, the people who are more likely to use these are people with heavy alcohol issues. And also, perhaps unsurprisingly, it was minors. So the youth were using them to buy alcohol at a much greater level than they could in something like a bar. It is actually harder for minors to buy alcohol at a bar than it is for them to buy alcohol at a liquor store, and especially a drive-through liquor store, according to the science. So when you ask people who just got a DUI where they got their liquor, a lot of them reported that they had gotten it at a drive-through liquor store. And they were more likely to be drinking in the car if they had gotten it through the drive-through too. And surprise, when they got rid of drive-through liquor stores in certain states, the rates of fatal motor vehicle crashes due to alcohol were decreased. This is true for basically everything involving alcohol. If you make it harder for people to get a hold of that alcohol, it's going to be harder for them to drive drunk as well. So doing things like increasing taxes or not allowing sales on Sundays or even allowing just kind of lower alcohol level beer like 3-2 beer, which is where you can buy beer that is at a 3.2% or lower ABV, that does seem to decrease people being drunk, and that does seem to then decrease them driving drunk. And when people switched and started allowing sales then on Sunday, motor vehicle crashes increased and so did crime. So maybe Minnesota has it right. Another thing that could really help, literally just enforcing the laws more. According to the literature, only about 1 in every 300 to 1,000 drunk driving trips leads to an arrest, which is way too low. So countries like Australia have put together really stringent checkpoints. So in Australia, basically they pulled over every 1 in 3 people and then just checked them to see if they were driving drunk. So you can't force somebody in the US to blow into a breathalyzer without probable cause, but they can do things like test the air in front of you to see if it contains alcohol. It's a weird little loophole that people use, and they find that that actually does help determine who is drunk driving. This is true for open container laws too. We see that it could work if you actually enforced it. When you don't enforce it, people think that they can get away with things and they're more likely to try. And the psychological side of this literature suggests that that's true too. So the severity of the crime does not seem to matter. It is whether or not you're actually going to be caught for it. Now, all of those things have been shown to work well. What about the things that don't necessarily work as well? Rideshare programs where you either have rides available for things like specific holidays or where you just have more Uber and Lyft available, that might help, but it depends on if people are actually using them. So a lot of the people who should be using them probably aren't. What about treating servers better to make sure that they're not over serving? Well, it doesn't seem like that works that well either. It might work if you did it consistently and thoroughly enough, but that's not going to happen in restaurants anytime soon. And what about things like mass media programs or like MAD? Well, in general, we don't have good evidence to say that they work. Now, that is potentially not a problem about the actual program. So we do see that MAD leads to a lot of like these legal changes that we've talked about, which do help decrease drunk driving. But the problem is that they're typically all implemented at the same time. So usually we have a ton of checkpoints along with a thing saying, hey, there are a ton of checkpoints. And so you can't really disconnect that mass media message with the actual program. Now, what about the idea of just assigning a designated driver? This does not actually work that well. They found that when they pulled over people, designated drivers were actually typically likely to have a higher blood alcohol content than anybody else on the road. This might actually be riskier for the passengers because it suggests that they can now drink to excess. So DDs are actually probably worse than some of these other ideas. Now, what about the people who've already had a DUI? Are there any things that work better to prevent them from driving drunk again? Rehab might work. Jail does not seem to actually stop them from driving drunk again. But there are things that might work. So ignition interlocks that are mandatory, that seems to be beneficial. And also things like lowering their maximum amount of alcohol in their system compared to somebody who's never had a DUI. So making the maximum limit 0.04 versus 0.08, that seems to work decently too. Now, one of the major issues for all of this is that it's really hard to study. Like, we just kind of assume that most single vehicle fatal crashes might have something to do with alcohol or drugs. But that might not be a great measure. And we also see that people who are driving under the influence of alcohol are more likely to do other things that make them more likely to crash too. So it makes it a little bit harder to pull apart the alcohol effects here. So they are more likely to run a red. They're more likely to not wear a seatbelt. They're just kind of driving more uninhibited. Most of these things take years to see the effects, on average about 6 years after you implement the policy. And we as humans will evolve. So if you create checkpoints during the night, people will start to day drink. They removed drive-through liquor stores, but just allowed people to park and then walk up to a window, and that didn't count as drive-through anymore. And we're in a new world, so there's a bill out there that is suggesting that auto manufacturers be required to have impaired driving protection in all vehicles automatically installed. So who knows what will happen in the future. But you can choose not to drive drunk, and you could also tell your friends that you do not approve of this. The science says that that works better than some of these other policies in some cases. Make plans for when you're going out and make sure people understand your view.